National Assembly Speaker Mama Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says South Africans need a strong and vibrant legislative sector whose interventions reflect the hopes and needs of the people. Delivering her maiden speech at the penultimate meeting of the Speakers Forum in Pretoria on Thursday, the newly elected Speaker called for a speedy resolution in matters that hinder the work of legislatures. She joins us now to talk more on this. Mama, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time this evening. When I read the remarks that you were making to the speakers, you talk about the importance of legislation, but one of the things that you talk about is how crucial the voice of the people is and how people are yearning to be included. And this is happening even at a time where we're seeing this frustration also emanate, ahead of the local government elections. Talk to us about that.
Thank you very much, Bongiwe, and thank you to the listeners. You know, Bongiwe, we are going to the local government elections, and as we move around campaigning throughout the country, obviously we then interact with the voters, and in the course of that, voters express their frustrations at times about our inability to engage with them about what they need. And therefore, sometimes the things we do are not informed by the needs of our society. But also, just generally, the importance of participatory democracy determines that democracy in the country allows for South African communities to be active participants in processes of developing legislation, in processes of governance, in the same way that South Africans are the ones who actually ensured that we have the kind of constitution we have today.
And I wonder, how then do you envision ordinary South Africans becoming participants in, the formulation of legislation?
Well, as you know, one of the most critical aspects of the work of parliamentary committees is that of developing legislation. And of course, in the course of developing legislation, in the course of developing policy, members of parliament have an obligation to engage with members of the South African public. That is why sometimes you hear that there are public imbizos, indabas, that you sometimes even see the National Council of Provinces going out to the provinces, and it will say they are talking to the South African people, so that people themselves can have an input in the kind of policy you are developing through that piece of legislation. There are several occasions when this has happened. It happens all the time. I recall, for instance, when I was in Home Affairs and when I had to develop, when the Constitutional Court had ruled that Parliament must develop what is called a union bill, marriage bill. We did that. It was a difficult one, rather controversial at the time, but we had to do it because our Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa allows for South Africans to associate and marry whoever they want to marry.
Now, when you look at, what you've alluded to, which is the distance, the apparent distance between the people and the officials, where do you think this disconnect is? What can we attribute it to? Because this is not something new that you're raising. People are feeling more and more like they are on the sidelines and they're bystanders instead of being participants.
Okay, let me start by correcting, because I said union bill, civil union bill. I'm sure you must be familiar.
Yes, Mama.
Now, with regards to this, I think the people in the main, one of the issues we discussed at the Speakers Forum is the whole issue of the legislative sectoral bill, which is a bill which has been in the pipeline, in that the the officials have drafted the bill. It is left for us politicians now to deal with that bill extensively and pass that bill, because that bill actually assets the authority of the legislature. It also assets the rights of the people of South Africa to participate in the work that we do in Parliament. Now, one of the critical elements of our Constitution is that it talks to three arms of the state, namely your legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. Now, obviously, you also talk about the different spheres of governance. Amongst those, that would be your municipalities, your provinces, national government. Now, what is important is that it doesn't matter what you do and how you do it at the level, not at your national level as the executive, and even at the provincial level. The most critical area of work is done by municipalities. And I can proudly say that one of the reasons why the executive took the responsibility, the president in particular, that there should be what is called the district model kind of government, where all government departments come together, engage, not just engage amongst themselves, but also engage with communities, with the citizens of the country about their needs, what it is they think should be prioritized in the areas where they live. But also, it gives you an opportunity to even report back to communities about the mandate which they gave you during this campaign, for instance, as the one we are having right now. As we go around, remember we've launched a manifesto. All parties are launching their manifestos, and yesterday a code of conduct was signed by all the parties. It therefore is incumbent upon us as politicians to then go back to those communities to say, with regards to the manifesto which we presented to you, your needs which are all in that manifesto, these are the things you asked us to do, and this is how far we have gone. These are the limitations we are having. That is, in the event we have, for instance, budgetary constraints, we do exactly that. So the three spheres of government are very important, but the most important of them all is that one which is called the local government sphere, through our municipalities, where we govern the people of the Republic of South Africa.
Now, you know, when we talk about the local government elections, a lot of people say, but you shouldn't be bothering Parliament, you know, when it comes to local government elections. But I disagree, because, as you say, it's important for Parliament to hold municipalities to account, especially because we also see the Auditor General table her report in those very parliamentary chambers. And these reports continue to paint a bleak picture of municipalities. I remember in the last one, 27 municipalities receiving clean audits. We still hear of officials that are not skilled, that don't even know how to read or interpret some of their own financials. I wonder then, what do you see as the role of Parliament when it comes to ensuring accountability here, so that post these elections, we don't continue to see the same picture emanating in our municipalities?
Well, that talks to the issue of oversight. One of the critical roles of Parliament is that of oversight, and not just oversight, effective oversight, in that you, one, ensure that there is accountability to Parliament by the executive, but also you have to ensure that there is collaboration and coordination of work with regards to the National Council on Provinces, for instance, together with the provinces and the municipalities. So the effectiveness of oversight obviously ensures that Parliament, together with the executive, can actually interact and identify weaknesses where there are weaknesses, and take remedial action when there's need for remedial action in areas where it is required. So for me, what is critical is that issue which we have talked to earlier on, which is participation of our people in parliamentary processes, so that they too can appreciate that as they do so, we also have the responsibility and the obligation of ensuring that the municipalities, the executive do account to the legislature. So it's a two-way process. You give people the right to throw in their ideas, their views, to express themselves about what it is that they expect from you, but equally you are able to go out through the executive, of course, and through the parliamentary committees to demand from the municipalities accountability. I think for me, it's about oversight and accountability.
Let's continue our conversation with National Assembly Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. Mama, we're talking about the importance of, accountability and Parliament ensuring that those who are elected into positions are held to account. And one of the things that your predecessor said when she was speaking at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, in fact, she apologized that Parliament didn't do its job in terms of holding the executive to account. You are now occupying that seat. How will you make sure that this happens?
Well, I can assure you that we have a constitution, and that constitution talks to the separation of powers, the legislature, executive, and the judiciary. And I know that a number of people may be looking at me and say, but she comes from the executive. She was a member of the executive. How will she ensure that there's effective oversight over her peers or her former colleagues? And I can assure that the rules provide that for all committees of Parliament to exercise that accountability, that oversight. But not only that, there is regular interaction right now, for instance, even between myself as the Speaker, new as I am, and the Leader of Government Business, where the Leader of Government Business is reminded, for instance, constantly about what is outstanding. For instance, our signing letters, which talk to annual reports, which must be submitted by the 30th of this month of October. They should all be in Parliament. But also questions to the executive by members of Parliament, whether there are any outstanding questions from members of the executive, and where there are such outstanding questions, then my responsibility is to then communicate to the Leader of Government Business to indicate that, for instance, the following ministers have X number of outstanding questions. So those are just two ways of dealing with issues of accountability of the executive to Parliament. So through the question and answer sessions we hold, and even through written questions which are sent to ministers, members of the executive are provided with the opportunity to address South Africans and respond to questions which they raise.
I wonder, at the back of what you've just said now, you'll say to this, because some people have looked at Parliament as a body that really rubber stamps the decisions of the governing party. Recently, the Treasurer General of the political party which you are part of spoke to our reporter and told us about the Political Party Funding Act. Political parties have said this affected them, and your political party is also one that said it has, been affected by this. And he says to our reporter that they are going to tell the minister to change this. And when he said that, at the back of my mind was the concern then that says, so it's clear that Parliament is then going to rubber stamp this because it's simply not working for the governing party. How will you deal with a situation like that? Because South Africans will look to you and say that you're just merely going to rubber stamp then something that he said needs to happen.
Well, he's a politician. He's a politician. If the treasurer of the ANC, which is a governing party, says he will interact with the minister about it, well, he knows that, you may as well interact with the minister, but you have a very important work to do in Parliament. In other words, ultimately, the people who will have the final say on that matter will be your members of Parliament. It will be Parliament. And by the way, much as we talk about the ANC being the majority in Parliament, the fact that the ANC is the majority in Parliament does not mean that those of us who belong to the ANC bulldoze members of Parliament into taking decisions, even decisions they don't necessarily agree with. It is not true. In fact, in Parliament, and I know this, that's one area where there is very robust and vibrant discussion amongst political parties. That's one area where we criticize one another and fight sometimes. But at the end of it all, we all know that South Africa stands to gain when we agree, or even when we agree to disagree. So I'm just saying that the Treasurer General of the African National Congress is fully aware of what these processes are, and that ultimately, whatever happens, if anyone is to amend what is currently underway right now, would have to go through that process of public participation and make their inputs and motivate why there should be a reversal of some of the decisions which have been taken.
And one of the things you said in your remarks, which really sparked my interest as well, is the Pan-African Parliament. I mean, you say that South Africa really needs to ensure that it continues to host this. Other people will argue that it's a waste of time, especially because in the past, those MPs were accused of just shopping in Sandton, not sitting for their sittings, and also really not doing the work that they needed to do. And then recently we saw that standoff between the North and the South in terms of the voting system, and it collapsed. So some are saying that it'll really be the waste of time if this Parliament really were to sit again, because it doesn't look like it does much in any case.
Well, I think that's incorrect. I think that it's important that as we look at what has happened, the session which was disrupted in May of this year in Midrand, I think that incident, that episode sort of diverted our attention from the real issues related to the Pan-African Parliament and the reasons why, in fact, South Africa decided to host the Pan-African Parliament. I need to remind South Africans that when I recall very vividly when the then President Mbeki and his cabinet actually were really pushed hard to make sure that we host the Pan-African Parliament as the Republic of South Africa, precisely because one of our immediate priorities as South Africans, when after drafting that constitution, adopting it, and in the course of building and strengthening this democracy, we said ours would be an African agenda. And therefore, whatever it is that we do, that we would understand and appreciate that we are part of this continent, we are Africans, and ours is to ensure that there's prosperity in the continent, there's peace in the continent, and that as part of that African community, that we as South Africa, obviously, because really, if we may be honest, we had the necessary resources to do so. So we did actually put ourselves on the table. There was an election. People supported South Africa. So whatever happened in May should not make us lose the reasons why and the rationale behind the decision to host the Pan-African Parliament, that it had to do with putting firmly on our agenda what is called the African agenda.
And when we speak tonight, you know, you touch on the continent. We saw disturbing reports coming out of Malawi that a former deputy speaker shot himself inside Parliament, and this happened in the capital. You know, we've seen a lot of reaction to this particular story. I wonder if, you know, as a speaker here in South Africa, you will have a reaction to that particular story.
Oh, definitely we will. And if I may say, I think our condolences to the Malawian people, to the family of the deceased, to the government and members of the legislature of Malawi. But I do want to say this. Sometimes I feel that people who commit suicide in the manner in which this was done, firstly, I wouldn't want to judge the person because I don't know what his personal circumstances were. But I can't stop thinking about just how selfish people can be at times, because that person was working in Parliament, had colleagues in Parliament, had officials in that Parliament. So you had a whole lot of people who have been subjected to tremendous trauma because of that incident, and the trauma of the family as well. So I'm just thinking that what made him think that he should go to Parliament and carry out this act in Parliament. And I'm saying I don't want to judge the man. I don't know what his circumstances were, but I also am of the view that people sometimes can be very selfish, because you can imagine the numbers of people in that Parliament who are left with permanent scars of trauma which they were subjected to yesterday. Now, I do also want to make the point, you may not be aware, we too here in South Africa, we had an incident where an official in Parliament committed suicide, I think last year in 2020, within the precinct of Parliament. And there too, and you know, my attitude was, okay, let's not judge the person. We can't, we shouldn't, we don't know what happened. But really to choose that place to carry out that act and thereby subjecting everybody else, everybody around you to that kind of trauma, I think it's selfish, and I think it is unfair and unreasonable. But let God be the judge. It can't be us.
Mama, as a final question tonight, I'll ask you to just wear different hat for the time being and be an ANC member. There are staff members who battled for months to get paid. I wonder, what are your thoughts, your reflections on this? Because these are families, these are breadwinners, these are, you know, people who have got bills to pay at the end of the month.
Well, it's a very sad development, I should say. A very sad development, and I say this with all humility, and I come from the ruling party, and of course, and I think it is unfortunate because indeed, as you say, we have staff members who are running our head office. Now, for instance, we are running a campaign, and all of us, of course, expect to get all the necessary support from the staff members, whether they are in Lutuli House, here at National, or even in the provinces and the regions. But equally, these are people who have not received their salaries. But I'm also aware that there is currently a process of paying out, even though there's still something outstanding. But I'm just saying it's a very sad development and a new development, something which has never happened before. I think as the African National Congress, speaking from that side now, wearing that hat, as you said, it's something which we have never experienced, but the organization, remember, is growing and the resources are getting limited every day. We also have laws in Southeast Africa which determine that if you do, for instance, sponsor or even donate financial resources to a political party, you then have an obligation to come out and disclose, to a point of disclosing how much that money is. So some of the sponsors of the past, I guess, are now reluctant to come forward because either they don't want to be known, or they are just humility. Sometimes when you just don't want people to say, look, oh, he has this kind of money, he's rich, and that. So out of maybe humility, I don't know. And so I would say it's an embarrassing situation. Of course, as leadership, which I am part of, and part of the collective of the leadership of the African National Congress, it is something which is terribly embarrassing, but we think as well it's an opportunity for us to learn from whatever mistakes we may have committed along the way, so that tomorrow we may be able to correct those mistakes. But not only that, we should not have a repetition of what has happened. I mean, for those of us who are in government, for those of us who are in the legislature, for those of us who are even in municipalities, we continue to receive our salaries. But for those who are providing us the support, for those who are the backbone, who are doing the donkey work for us to be where we are, there are no salaries. I mean, here I'm not just talking about staff. It starts even from the officials themselves. I mean, all the secretaries of the African National Congress, whether nationally, as you see, Josie Duarte, or even in the provinces, different provinces, none of them have received salaries. And of course, these are the people who are the backbone. These are the people who provide us and give impetus to everything which we are doing in government. And therefore, we should have our heads in shame because of this development. But equally, it does not mean that we should be just hanging our heads in shame and do nothing about it. I think everything is being done to make sure that money is available for the staff in Luthuli House and in all the provinces and regions to be paid. And I'm saying it is particularly embarrassing that it is happening at a time when we are preparing for the local cabinet elections.
All right, Mama, thank you so much for your time this evening. We certainly do appreciate it. That was the National Assembly Speaker, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. Well.